The battlefield stretched far and wide, a wasteland of broken metal and scorched earth. Smoke lingered in the air, the scent of burnt machinery mixing with the sharp tang of alien energy weapons. The war between humans and the Valkyrie, a proud warrior species, had raged for years. Among the gathered alien soldiers, Zirek, a young but promising warrior, stood tall. His pale blue skin shimmered under the artificial sun of the alien worship above. His people, the Valkyrie, were known for their genetic superiority, stronger, faster, and bred for battle. They rarely lost in one-on-one combat, especially not to a human. Across from him, Nathan Carter adjusted the heavy armor covering his body. The suit, bulky and reinforced with advanced alloys, hummed softly as its power core stabilized. He could feel the weight of it pressing down, but he had trained for this. Humans had no natural claws, no enhanced muscles, and no super speed like the Valkyrie, but they had something else: strategy, experience, willpower. A smirk played on Zirek's lips as he observed Nathan. "You rely too much on your armor, human," he said, his voice filled with amusement. "Take that off, and you'd be nothing." Nathan chuckled, his voice calm through the helmet speaker. "Is that why your people wear battle suits, too? Or is it just a fashion statement?" The gathered Valkyrie warriors laughed, but Zirek's eyes narrowed. He had heard stories about humans. They were unpredictable, stubborn, and sometimes outright reckless. But in his mind, that didn't matter. Strength decided the winner, and he was stronger. "Let's see how long you last," Zirek said, raising his weapon, a curved plasma-forged blade that glowed with dangerous energy. Nathan flexed his fingers over the controls inside his gauntlets. His armor wasn't just protection. It was a tool, and he knew exactly how to use it. The fight begins. Zirek moved first. He was a blur of speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. The Valkyrie were fast, far faster than any unarmored human, but Nathan wasn't unarmored. He raised his left arm just in time, his gauntlet absorbing the strike. Sparks flew as Zirek's blade clashed against reinforced plating, the impact forcing Nathan back a step, but he held his ground. Another attack. This time, Zirek twisted midair, aiming a downward slash at Nathan's exposed shoulder. Nathan sidestepped, countering with a heavy swing of his armored fist. Zirek dodged easily, but now there was distance between them again. "You're slower than I expected," Zirek taunted. "Your armor makes you a walking target." Nathan exhaled through his nose. He had fought Valkyrie before. They were overconfident, always assuming they had already won before the battle even began. That was their weakness. They underestimated humans. Zirek charged again, this time aiming lower. Nathan shifted his stance, waiting for the perfect moment. When Zirek swung, Nathan twisted his body, letting the attack glide harmlessly off his armor. In the same motion, he brought his armored elbow up, slamming it into Zirek's chest. The impact sent Zirek stumbling back, his breath escaping in a harsh grunt. The Valkyrie warriors watching the fight grew quiet. For the first time, Zirek was hit. A warrior's pride. Zirek's expression darkened. He had been careless. He wouldn't let it happen again. With renewed focus, he lunged forward, slashing at Nathan with rapid, precise movements. Sparks flew as the blade scraped against metal, each strike testing the armor's durability. Nathan absorbed the blows, letting Zirek exhaust himself. His suit could take a beating, but he had no intention of just standing there forever. He just needed one opening. Finally, it came. Zirek overextended on an aggressive thrust. Nathan pivoted smoothly, stepping past the attack and grabbing Zirek's wrist with an iron grip. The young alien's eyes widened in shock as Nathan twisted, flipping him over and slamming him into the ground. The force sent dust flying, and gasps erupted from the Valkyrie warriors watching. Zirek struggled, but Nathan kept his grip firm. "Still think I'm too slow?" Nathan asked, his voice calm. Zirek growled, wrenching himself free and leaping back to his feet. His pride was wounded, but he refused to accept defeat. "You're only standing because of that suit," Zyrek spat, wiping the dust from his face. "Without it, you wouldn't last a second." Nathan tilted his head slightly, considering Zyrek's words. Then, to the shock of everyone present, he reached up and began unlocking the seals on his armor. A hushed silence fell over the battlefield. "What are you doing?" Zyrek demanded. Nathan said nothing as the heavy plates fell to the ground with a dull thud. Piece by piece, he removed the reinforced armor, until he stood in only his basic combat gear, no enhancements, no shields, no protection. He flexed his hands, rolling his shoulders. He felt lighter, faster. Zyrek, for the first time in his life, felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. He had mocked the human's armor, but now that it was gone, he realized something. Nathan Carter wasn't weak, and he wasn't afraid. A heavy silence hung over the battlefield. The once amused Valkyrie warriors now stared in disbelief. Nathan Carter, the human they had mocked for hiding behind his armor, had removed it completely. Zyrek's fingers tightened around the hilt of his plasma-forged blade. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Why would a human give up his only protection? Nathan rolled his shoulders, feeling lighter, faster. The weight of the armor was gone, but his confidence remained. He took a slow step forward, his boots pressing into the scorched ground. "You said I couldn't last a second without my armor," Nathan said, his voice calm. "Now's your chance to prove it." Zyrek scowled. He had never backed down from a fight before, and he wasn't about to start now. If this human wanted to face him without protection, so be it. With a sudden burst of speed, Zyrek lunged forward, faster than before. The speed of a warrior. The moment Zyrek moved, the watching Valkyrie warriors cheered. He was one of their best, trained from birth, genetically enhanced, and now completely free to use his full strength. Nathan, however, was ready. Zyrek's blade sliced through the air, aimed straight for Nathan's chest. The human sidestepped at the last moment, the weapon missing him by an inch. Before Zyrek could react, Nathan pivoted, bringing his elbow up, striking Zyrek's ribs. The alien warrior staggered back, his breath hitching for a moment. His body armor had absorbed most of the impact, but the force was stronger than he expected. Nathan didn't give him time to recover. He pressed forward, launching a flurry of attacks, a sharp kick, a quick jab, then another strike aimed at Zyrek's shoulder. Zyrek barely managed to block in time. The power behind Nathan's blows was unnatural for a species without enhancements. The watching Valkyrie warriors were no longer cheering. They were watching in stunned silence. The shock of strength. Zyrek gritted his teeth. He was supposed to be the stronger one. Humans weren't built for battle, so how was Nathan keeping up with him? He roared in frustration, gripping his blade with both hands and swinging with all his might. The energy-infused weapon carved through the air toward Nathan's side. But Nathan ducked. The blade missed its mark, and in the same motion, Nathan grabbed Zyrek's wrist, twisting it sharply. Zyrek gasped in pain as his grip faltered. Nathan kicked the blade out of his hands, sending it flying. For the first time in his life, Zyrek was unarmed in a battle. A ripple of unease spread through the Valkyrie warriors watching the fight. This was not how it was supposed to go. Nathan stepped back, allowing Zyrek to regain his balance. He didn't attack an unarmed opponent. Zyrek clenched his fists, his pride burning. "Fight me properly, human," he growled. Nathan smirked. "I am." A lesson in combat. Zyrek charged forward, this time without his weapon. He threw a punch, aiming for Nathan's jaw. Nathan didn't dodge. Instead, he caught Zyrek's fist midair, his grip like iron. The young alien warrior's eyes widened. His strength was legendary among his kind. No human should be able to match it. But Nathan wasn't just matching it. He was winning. Nathan tightened his grip for a second before shoving Zyrek back, making the alien stumble. "You're strong," Nathan admitted, rolling his neck. "But strength alone doesn't win fights." Zurek growled in frustration. He refused to lose. He refused to believe a human could defeat him. He attacked again, this time using his speed. He weaved, dodging left, then right, trying to confuse Nathan. Then, with a sudden burst, he struck. Nathan caught him again. The moment Zurek's arm came forward, Nathan trapped it between his own, locking him in place. Then, with one swift motion, Nathan flipped Zurek over his shoulder and slammed him into the ground. A cloud of dust erupted as Zurek hit the earth, his breath knocked from his lungs. The Valkyrie warriors watching the fight froze. Zurek, their warrior, their champion, was on his back, struggling to breathe. And Nathan stood over him, completely calm. A moment of realization. Zurek lay on the ground, staring up at the human who had just defeated him without armor, without weapons, just pure skill. For the first time, Zurek understood. Humans weren't weak. They weren't fragile creatures hiding behind their armor. They were something far more dangerous. Nathan extended a hand. "Get up," he said simply. Zurek hesitated, then grasped Nathan's hand. The human pulled him up effortlessly. The watching Valkyrie warriors exchanged glances, unsure of what to say. Zurek met Nathan's gaze, his pride wounded but his respect earned. "You're different," Zurek admitted. Nathan shrugged. "We're human." Zurek exhaled, shaking his head with a small chuckle. "I won't underestimate your kind again." Nathan smiled. "Good, because next time, I won't go easy on you." The battlefield was no longer divided between alien and human. It was now divided between those who understood human strength and those who had yet to learn. A heavy silence settled over the battlefield. The Valkyrie warriors, once laughing and mocking the human, now stood frozen. Their young champion, Zurek, had been defeated, not by technology, not by superior firepower, but by a human's sheer skill and resilience. Zurek, still catching his breath, wiped the dust from his face. He stared at Nathan Carter, the human who had proven him wrong. The very idea of humans being physically weak was shattered in an instant. Nathan stood calmly, arms crossed over his chest, as if waiting for Zurek to accept the reality of what had happened. The silence was unbearable. The gathered warriors were used to victories, not defeats, especially not against an opponent they had considered inferior. Zurek clenched his fists, frustration building in his chest. He was supposed to be the superior warrior. He had genetic enhancements, faster reflexes, greater strength. So why did he lose? Taking a deep breath, he straightened his posture and faced Nathan. "You got lucky," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. Luck had nothing to do with it. Zurek's pride burned at those words. He wasn't used to being looked down upon, not by a human. A warrior's doubt. Zurek turned his gaze to his fellow Valkyrie warriors. Their expressions varied. Some were shocked. Others looked away, embarrassed for him. He had never felt this before. Doubt. Nathan noticed and sighed. He had seen this look before, on countless soldiers who lost their first real fight. Zurek wasn't weak. He was just too confident in what he thought he knew. Nathan smirked and tilted his head. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" Zurek frowned. "Thinking about what?" Nathan stepped closer. "How a weak human just threw you across the battlefield." A flicker of irritation flashed in Zurek's eyes. The human wasn't even mocking him. He was simply stating the truth. And somehow, that made it worse. Nathan took a step back and stretched his arms, rolling his shoulders. "You said without my armor, I wouldn't last a second." He pointed at Zurek. "So tell me, who was the one on the ground?" Laughter erupted from the human soldiers watching the fight. Even some Valkyrie warriors smirked, unable to ignore the truth. Zurek's jaw tightened. He wasn't angry at Nathan. He was angry at himself. The truth hurts. Zurek took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He replayed the fight in his mind, searching for where he went wrong. Nathan didn't overpower him with raw strength. He didn't win with speed. He outmaneuvered him. It was experience. Valkyrie warriors trained in one way: brutal combat, overwhelming force. But Nathan, he had learned to adapt. He read movements, reacted, and turned every mistake into an opportunity. Zurek exhaled sharply. He hated to admit it, but he had learned more from this one loss than in his years of training. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking too much. That's your problem." Zurek frowned. "Excuse me." Nathan chuckled. "You're trying to figure out why you lost instead of just accepting it. You lost because I'm better." The words hit Zurek like a punch to the gut. He wanted to argue, to fight back. But deep down, he knew Nathan was right. A different kind of strength. For the first time, Zurek saw humans differently. They weren't stronger. They weren't faster. But they had something far more dangerous: the ability to improve. Valkyrie warriors trained their entire lives, but they relied on their natural advantages: strength, speed, agility. But humans, they worked for every inch of progress. Nathan had no genetic enhancements, no natural superiority. And yet he won. Zurek exhaled and slowly nodded. "You fight differently than us." Nathan smirked. "That's the point." Zurek looked at his hands, then at Nathan. He wanted to understand. "Teach me," Zurek said suddenly. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Teach you." Zurek clenched his fists. "Teach me how humans fight. Teach me how to win like you do." A murmur spread through the crowd. A proud Valkyrie warrior asking the human for guidance. This was unheard of. Nathan studied Zurek for a moment, then shrugged. "All right." Zurek blinked. "Just like that." Nathan grinned. "If you're willing to learn, I'm willing to teach." Zurek narrowed his eyes. "You're not going to humiliate me first." Nathan laughed. "What's the point? You already know the truth." Zurek sighed, but a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Maybe losing wasn't the worst thing. Maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something greater. A strange silence filled the battlefield. Zurek, the proud Valkyrie warrior, had just done something unthinkable. He had asked a human to teach him. The other Valkyrie warriors exchanged confused glances. Some whispered among themselves, unable to believe what they had just heard. A Valkyrie asking a human for guidance. It was unheard of. Nathan Carter, however, showed no surprise. He simply crossed his arms and studied Zurek, as if considering his request. Zurek stood firm, his jaw clenched. He could feel the eyes of his people watching, judging. His whole life, he had been told that humans were weaker, slower, dependent on their technology. But after facing Nathan, he knew better. Nathan had defeated him without armor, without weapons, just pure skill and experience. That was something worth learning. Finally, Nathan smirked. "All right, I'll teach you." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some of the Valkyrie warriors looked uncomfortable, others just curious. Zurek narrowed his eyes. No hesitation. Nathan shrugged. "Why would I hesitate? You've already learned the hardest lesson, that you don't know everything." Zurek exhaled sharply. The words stung, but he couldn't deny them. The first lesson. Nathan walked over to a small pile of stones on the ground. He picked one up, tossing it casually between his hands. "You Valkyrie are strong," Nathan said. "No doubt about that. But strength alone doesn't win fights." Zurek crossed his arms. "Then what does?" Nathan grinned. "Strategy." Without warning, he threw the rock at Zurek's head. Zurek's reflexes kicked in, and he caught it effortlessly. He frowned, looking at Nathan. Was that supposed to? Before he could finish, Nathan was already behind him. Zurek barely had time to react as Nathan swept his leg out from under him. He fell backward, landing hard on the ground. The crowd gasped. Nathan stood over him, hands on his hips. "See, you focused on the wrong thing." Zurich groaned and sat up, rubbing his back. "That was a cheap trick." Nathan smirked. "No, that was tactics." Zurich scowled but nodded. He understood now. Humans didn't just fight with their bodies. They fought with their minds. Breaking old habits. Nathan offered his hand again. This time, Zurich took it without hesitation. Nathan continued, "You Valkyrie fight with instincts. You're fast, strong, but predictable. You attack first, expecting your strength to carry you." Zurich frowned. "And humans?" Nathan gestured to himself. "We don't have your strength or speed. So we adapt. We study our enemies. We use what's around us." Zurich exhaled slowly. He had spent his whole life training, but not thinking. Nathan grinned. "We'll start simple. Come at me again." Zurich hesitated. "Without a weapon?" Nathan nodded. "No weapons. No armor. Just you." Zurich took a deep breath and steadied himself. He moved forward, carefully this time. No reckless charges. No wasted movements. Nathan watched him, waiting. Zurich feinted to the left, then suddenly pivoted right, aiming a strike at Nathan's ribs. This time, he wasn't overextending. Nathan barely dodged in time. He grinned. "Now you're getting it." The two clashed again, but this time, Zurich was learning. A watching audience. The Valkyrie warriors who had once mocked Nathan were now watching with interest. Their champion, the young warrior they had believed unbeatable, was learning from a human. A few of them whispered among themselves, "If he's learning from the human, does that mean humans have something we lack? Maybe they aren't as weak as we thought." A high-ranking Valkyrie warrior, Commander Kravos, narrowed his eyes as he observed. He had dismissed humans before, considering them inferior. But after witnessing Nathan's fight with Zurich, he wasn't so sure anymore. Nathan and Zurich continued their sparring, sweat forming on their brows. Zurich was improving, his movements sharper, his attacks less predictable. Nathan still outmaneuvered him, but the gap was closing. An unexpected realization. After several minutes, Nathan stepped back, raising a hand. "That's enough for today." Zurich panted, his muscles burning. He was exhausted, but satisfied. He had never fought like this before. He had never thought like this before. Nathan smirked. "Not bad. You're learning." Zurich exhaled. "It's different." Nathan nodded. "It has to be. Humans don't win by being the strongest. We win by being the smartest." Zurich frowned. "Then why do humans wear armor if you fight like this?" Nathan chuckled. "Armor is a tool, just like weapons. But the real weapon is up here." He tapped his head. Zurich glanced around at the watching warriors. He could see doubt in their eyes. Some of them were thinking the same thing he was. If humans weren't weak, then what else had they been wrong about? The beginning of change. Nathan patted Zurich's shoulder. "You've got potential. Keep training, and one day you'll be even better." Zurich smirked. "You think so?" Nathan grinned. "I know so." A voice interrupted them. "You there, human." Nathan turned to see Commander Kravos approaching. The other Valkyrie warriors quickly stepped aside to let their superior pass. Kravos stopped in front of Nathan, his golden armor gleaming. His expression was unreadable. "You have impressed me," Kravos admitted. "Few warriors can defeat a Valkyrie, let alone teach one." Nathan nodded. "Glad to hear it." Kravos studied him for a moment, then crossed his arms. "I will watch your training closely. If what you say about humans is true, then maybe we still have much to learn." Nathan smirked. "Smart choice." Zurich grinned beside him. The war between humans and Valkyrie was not over. But today on this battlefield, something had changed. A bridge had been built. And the future? It was going to be very different. The sun dipped lower over the battlefield, casting long shadows over the scorched ground. The tension in the air was different now. The Valkyrie warriors, once confident in their superiority, now stood uncertain, their eyes locked onto the human who had shaken their beliefs. Nathan Carter smirked as he stretched his arms. Zurek stood across from him, still catching his breath from their sparring match. But something had changed. Zurek was no longer fighting recklessly. He wasn't charging in blindly, relying on brute force. He was learning. Commander Kravos, the high-ranking Valkyrie leader, remained silent as he observed. Nathan could feel the weight of his gaze, but he wasn't worried. He had seen this look before, the look of someone realizing they might have underestimated an opponent. Nathan clapped his hands. All right, lesson 2. Zurek wiped sweat from his brow and exhaled sharply. Another lesson already. Nathan chuckled. Did you think one fight was enough to make you unbeatable? Zurek hesitated, then sighed. Fine. What's next? Nathan stepped closer, his expression turning serious. You Valkyrie are used to winning through dominance. You overpower your enemies. But real warriors, they fight with their minds as much as their bodies. Zurek narrowed his eyes. You think humans are better at that? Nathan shrugged. I think humans have no choice. We aren't the fastest, the strongest, or the most durable. So we adapt or we die. The gathered Valkyrie warriors exchanged glances. They had always seen humans as weaklings who hid behind technology. But Nathan had proven otherwise. And now, they were listening. The next test. Nathan grabbed a wooden training stick and tossed it to Zurek. The alien warrior caught it easily, though confusion flickered across his face. A stick. Zurek scoffed. What am I supposed to do with this? Nathan smirked. Survive. Before Zurek could respond, Nathan grabbed his own stick and lunged. The attack was fast, too fast. Zurek barely had time to block as Nathan's stick whipped through the air, striking at his ribs, his arms, his legs. Zurek staggered back, gritting his teeth. He tried to counter, but Nathan wasn't there. He dodged, sidestepped, and struck again, each hit precise and controlled. The Valkyrie warriors watching began to murmur. Zurek is losing. Again. He's faster. He's stronger. Why can't he hit the human? Zurek growled in frustration. He had the advantage in strength. He should have been winning. But Nathan was one step ahead of him every time. Nathan suddenly stepped in close, swept Zurek's legs out from under him, and pressed the wooden stick to his throat before he could react. Zurek froze. Nathan grinned. That's lesson 2. Control. Understanding the difference. Nathan stepped back and offered his hand again. Zurek hesitated before taking it. You're fast, Nathan admitted. You're strong. But you fight like someone who's always won. Zurek frowned. What's wrong with that? Nathan smirked. When you always win, you stop thinking. You assume strength is enough. But real warriors, the best warriors, they prepare for losing. They don't fight expecting an easy victory. They fight expecting a challenge. Zurek's hands tightened into fists. He had never thought of it that way. Nathan continued. You fight to dominate. Humans fight to survive. That's the difference. A deep silence followed his words. The Valkyrie warriors, listening in, had never heard anything like this before. Their entire culture revolved around proving dominance. Winning was the only thing that mattered. But now this human was telling them that losing made warriors stronger. Zurek exhaled slowly, nodding. I understand now. Nathan smirked. Good, because I've got one more test for you. The final trial. Nathan grabbed a length of rope and tied it around a large boulder nearby. He handed the other end to Zurek. Zurek frowned. What's this for? Nathan folded his arms. Drag it across the battlefield. The watching warriors laughed. That's easy for a Valkyrie. Zurek will do it in seconds. Zurek raised an eyebrow. Are you serious? Nathan grinned. Completely. Zurek shrugged, took the rope, and pulled. The boulder barely moved, Frowning, Zirek adjusted his stance and pulled harder. His muscles strained, sweat forming on his forehead. The boulder moved, but slowly. After several minutes, Zirek was panting. His arms burned, his legs felt like lead. Nathan crouched next to him. Now, imagine doing this every day, with no enhancements, with no genetic advantages, just effort. Zyrek's breath hitched. He understood. Humans weren't weak because they lacked strength. They became strong because they had to be. Valkyrie warriors were born powerful. Humans built their power. Zirek dropped to his knees, exhausted. He had never felt this level of fatigue. And yet, he smiled. A warrior's respect. Nathan patted Zirek's shoulder. That's enough for today. Zirek exhaled sharply and nodded. You're right. We don't train like this. We don't push like humans do. Nathan smirked. Now you know why we're dangerous. The watching Valkyrie warriors remained silent. They had always believed humans were weaker. But now, they weren't so sure. Commander Kravos finally spoke. I see now. We misjudge your kind, human. Nathan grinned. Happens a lot. Kravos nodded. We will watch you closely. And if what you say is true, then perhaps there is more to learn. Zirek turned to Nathan, his expression one of genuine respect. I want to keep learning. If humans can become this strong without enhancements, then I want to train like a human. Nathan smirked. Then get ready, because I'm not going to go easy on you. The Valkyrie warriors exchanged glances. The war between their people and the humans wasn't over. But on this battlefield, at least for today, something new had begun. The first step toward understanding. The days that followed were filled with hard lessons. Nathan Carter was no longer just a soldier in the eyes of the Valkyrie. He had become something more. He was a teacher, a symbol of human resilience, and he had earned the respect of those who had once looked down on him. Zirek, once so sure of his own strength, now trained tirelessly, absorbing every lesson Nathan gave him. His movements were sharper, his strategies more precise. He had learned the first lesson, the one Nathan had drilled into him from the start. Strength alone would never win a fight. Now, he was beginning to understand the power of adaptability. The morning training. It was early in the morning when Nathan and Zirek began their daily training session. The sky was a soft gray, the first light of dawn barely touching the edges of the battlefield. The others were still sleeping, but Nathan had always believed in starting early. Zirek stood in front of Nathan, sweat already dripping from his brow. He was no longer the arrogant warrior who had once dismissed humans as weak. Now he stood tall, focused, and determined to master the skills Nathan was teaching him. You ready for today's lesson? Nathan asked, tossing him a training stick. Zirek caught it easily and nodded. I'm ready. Nathan grinned. Let's see if you can keep up then. The training was grueling. Nathan had learned long ago that fighting was not just about throwing punches. It was about predicting, outsmarting, and controlling the flow of battle. Zirek struggled at first, his strength still overpowering his tactics. But slowly he began to understand. Nathan would strike, feint, and force Zirek to think beyond his physical abilities. When Zirek finally blocked Nathan's blow in a controlled, calculated movement, a wide grin spread across his face. I blocked it, Zirek said, surprised by his own success. Nathan clapped him on the back. You did. You're learning. A new challenge. After several more hours of training, Nathan decided it was time for a real test. He motioned for Zirek to follow him. We're going to make this interesting, Nathan said. Zirek raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? Nathan smiled. You're going to face an opponent who doesn't play by the rules. Zyrek's confusion deepened as they reached a clearing. Standing there was Kravos, the Valkyrie commander. He stood with his arms crossed, an unreadable expression on his face. Commander Kravos, Zirek asked, surprised. Nathan nodded. Yep. He's your new sparring partner. Let's see how you handle someone who knows the tricks of the battlefield." Kravos stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at Zurek. "Let's see if the human's lessons were worth anything," he said, his voice deep and serious. Zurek turned to Nathan, who simply smiled and said, "Remember, you fight with your mind, not just your strength." The tension between the two warriors was palpable. Kravos had always considered himself the strongest and most experienced among the Valkyrie. To face him was a daunting challenge, but Zurek was no longer the naive warrior he had once been. The fight begins. Without warning, Kravos lunged forward with surprising speed. His large, muscular form moved like a predator, his blade aimed at Zurek's chest. Zurek reacted instinctively, blocking the strike with his training stick, but Kravos was relentless. The commander's movements were swift and calculated. Each blow pushed Zurek back, forcing him to retreat. Nathan watched closely, his arms crossed. He knew this was a pivotal moment for Zurek. Zurek gritted his teeth as he stumbled back. His breathing quickened, but instead of panicking, he focused. He remembered Nathan's teachings. Don't just react. Think ahead. He feinted to the left and then quickly sidestepped to the right, dodging Kravos' next strike. "Good," Nathan muttered, watching with approval. Zurek could feel the sweat dripping down his back as he adjusted his stance. He took a deep breath and found his rhythm. Kravos may be stronger, but he was beginning to understand Nathan's point. Strength without strategy would always be limited. He countered with a sudden twist of his body, landing a quick strike on Kravos' side. The commander grunted in surprise, stepping back to reassess his opponent. "You've improved," Kravos said, his voice filled with a rare respect. "But can you keep up with the pace?" Zurek didn't answer. He simply gritted his teeth and lunged at Kravos, his movements fluid and decisive. His stick clashed with Kravos' blade as the two fought fiercely. Zurek could feel his muscles burning, but his mind was clear. He was no longer relying on brute force alone. The turning point. As the fight dragged on, Zurek noticed something that Nathan had taught him. The best way to win wasn't always through a single strike, but by controlling the flow of the battle. He began to anticipate Kravos' movements, studying the commander's pattern. With a sudden, calculated move, Zurek twisted Kravos' weapon out of his hand and drove him backward with a quick strike. Kravos stumbled, but instead of attacking immediately, Zurek held back, watching Kravos closely. The commander stood straight, breathing heavily. He didn't seem angry or frustrated, just thoughtful. "Impressive, Zurek," Kravos said with a smirk. "You've learned well." Zurek stepped back, breathing hard but proud. He had faced the toughest warrior in the Valkyrie army and held his ground. Nathan walked up, clapping his hands. "Nice work. You kept your cool, and that's the real victory." Zurek smiled. "I didn't win yet." Nathan chuckled. "Doesn't matter. You're a warrior now, Zurek. You've learned how to think like one." A changing perspective. Kravos approached, his gaze shifting between Nathan and Zurek. "Perhaps it's time we rethink our view of humans," he said. "They might not be as weak as we thought." Zurek looked at Nathan, then back at Kravos. "Maybe humans don't have to be the strongest to win." Nathan grinned. "Exactly. We fight because we have to. And that's why we don't lose." The battle for supremacy between the Valkyrie and the humans was far from over, but with each lesson, each fight, the gap between them was shrinking. And Zurek, along with the other Valkyrie, was beginning to see that humans weren't just survivors. They were warriors in their own right. The training ground was quieter than usual, the sun now hanging low on the horizon, casting a golden light across the battlefield. Zurek stood tall, sweat still dripping down his face, his muscles aching from the grueling sessions. He had come a long way since his first encounter with Nathan, and he knew the journey wasn't over. Nathan Carter stood beside him, his expression calm but approving. "You're doing well, Zurek. Better than I expected, actually." Zurek smirked, wiping his forehead. You didn't think I could keep up. Nathan laughed. It wasn't that. I just didn't know how quickly you'd learn. You're not like the others. Zurich raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Nathan turned his head toward the other Valkyrie warriors, who were gathered on the sidelines, watching the ongoing lessons. Most of them would have given up by now. They don't like to admit that someone from another species could teach them anything. Zurich's gaze shifted toward the warriors. Some watched with respect, while others still looked at him with disbelief. But he had noticed the change in them. It was subtle, but there. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and in their place, respect was growing. You really think they're learning from me? Zurich asked, his voice laced with a mix of pride and uncertainty. Nathan nodded. The best warriors are the ones who can learn from anyone, even their enemies. Zurich didn't answer immediately. He had spent his whole life as a warrior, taught to rely on his strength, his speed, his enhancements. But what Nathan had shown him, the power of asterisk adaptability, thinking ahead, and not rushing in blindly, had completely transformed his understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. He had learned to think and act like a human, using his mind as much as his strength. The lesson of patience. As they walked to the center of the training area, Zurich noticed a few Valkyrie soldiers sparring in the distance. Their movements were fast, powerful, and direct. But something about the way they fought looked predictable. Nathan noticed his gaze. They're strong, but they still rely on their power. Zurich nodded, understanding what Nathan meant. He had once fought the same way, focused on overwhelming his opponents with brute force. But now, he knew there was more to a fight than that. Nathan handed him a new training stick. Let's try something different today. I want you to face me again, but this time, no rushing. I want you to think first, before you make a move. Zurich raised an eyebrow. You want me to fight without my instincts? Nathan smirked. Exactly. Use your instincts to pause. Think, then act. Zurich took a deep breath, settling into his stance. He could feel the weight of Nathan's words. Thinking first. It was easier said than done, but he was ready. As the two squared off, the quietness of the training field seemed to stretch. Zurich's mind raced with possibilities. Nathan was faster, more agile, and his strikes were precise. But Zurich had learned to wait, to observe. He waited for Nathan's next move. And when it came, Zurich was ready. Nathan's stick swung toward his side, but instead of blocking it with brute force, Zurich stepped back, allowing the strike to pass just inches from his body. Then, he countered quickly, twisting his body and landing a controlled hit to Nathan's chest. Nathan staggered back, surprised. He grinned, wiping away a trickle of sweat. Not bad. That was a good move. Zurich smirked. I didn't rush. I waited for the right moment. Nathan nodded, looking pleased. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. You're starting to think ahead instead of just reacting. That's the difference. Zurich looked at the other warriors again. He could see it now. The way they fought, always charging forward, always expecting to win by sheer power. They didn't wait. They didn't think. The change spreads. Over the next few days, the atmosphere on the battlefield began to shift. The Valkyrie warriors, who had once seen humans as nothing more than primitive creatures, were starting to notice something. It wasn't just Nathan who was teaching them. It was the very idea of human strength itself. Zurich wasn't the only one learning. As word spread of Nathan's training methods, some of the other warriors began to follow his example. They began to take a step back, to think first before charging in. It was subtle at first, but Zurich could see it in their movements, the hesitation, the brief moments of consideration. Even Kravos, the commander, had begun to change. Zurich saw the way he observed Nathan's lessons, the way his eyes would flicker with new understanding. Kravos was a proud leader, and admitting he could learn something from a human would have once been unthinkable. But now he was starting to see things differently. Zurich approached Kravos one evening as the commander watched the sparring from a distance. "You've been quiet lately, Kravos. Something on your mind?" Kravos didn't look at him at first. "I'm thinking about what Nathan said. About adapting. About the way humans fight." Zurich grinned. "I know what you mean. I used to think humans were weak. But now, I'm not so sure." Kravos finally turned to face him. "We've always relied on our strength. But I see now, that's not enough. There's more to being a warrior than being the strongest." He looked back at Nathan, who was currently training some of the younger soldiers. "I think the humans have something we've been missing." Zurich clapped him on the shoulder. "Then it's time we learn it." The path forward. The training continued, each day bringing new lessons, new insights. Zurich had changed. He no longer fought with the same arrogance he once did. He had learned to use his mind as much as his body, to anticipate, to plan. And as the days passed, he began to see the same change in the other Valkyrie. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. But it was there. They were learning, slowly, what it meant to fight like humans. Zurich stood tall as he watched the warriors spar, now fighting smarter instead of harder. The battlefield was quieter, the air less tense. For the first time in a long time, Zurich felt a sense of calm. Nathan walked up to him, wiping his brow. "How's it feel?" he asked with a grin. Zurich looked out over the field, his mind clearer than it had ever been. "It feels like we're finally starting to understand, not just how to fight, but how to be warriors." Nathan grinned. "You're getting it." Zurich nodded. "And we're not done yet." The war was far from over, but this was the beginning of something new. The Valkyrie and the humans, two species once at odds, were beginning to see the strength in each other. They weren't so different after all. The real battle wasn't on the battlefield. It was the battle for respect, for understanding, for change. And Zurich had learned that true warriors weren't defined by their power alone. They were defined by their ability to adapt and grow. The end of one journey, the beginning of another. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of a new one. A chapter where humans and Valkyrie might fight side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. A chapter where both sides would learn from each other, grow stronger together. The real victory wasn't in defeating an enemy. It was in understanding that together, they could be stronger than they had ever been apart.